May 29, 1944. 22,000 feet above the Solomon Sea, 400 miles northeast of Port Moresby. The P-38 Lightning shudders as Captain Thomas Maguire banks hard left, his twin Allison engines roaring against the thin Pacific air. Through the reinforced glass of his cockpit, he can see them 11 silver specks in the distance, B-24 Liberators lumbering toward their target at Hollandia. His wingmen hold formation off his right wing, their distinctive twin-boom silhouettes stark against the endless blue. Maguire's eyes drop to his fuel gauge. The needle sits just below half. They've been airborne for 2 hours and 15 minutes. Lead, this is Putt-Putt 3. The radio crackles. Fuel state is critical. I'm showing 190 gallons remaining. Maguire checks his own gauge again, does the mental calculation he's done 100 times before. At current consumption, they have maybe 45 minutes of combat flying time left. Maybe. The bombers ahead still have another hour to target, then the return trip. The mathematics of aerial warfare in the Pacific Theater are brutally simple and utterly unforgiving. Roger. 3. All flights, prepare to abort escort. We're at bingo fuel. The acknowledgements come back one by one. Every pilot in the formation knows what this means. They've known it since the pre-flight briefing. The P-38 Lightning, for all its speed and firepower, for all its twin-engine reliability and heavy armament, has one fatal flaw in the Pacific War: it cannot stay aloft long enough to matter. Those B-24s ahead will continue alone into enemy territory. They'll face Japanese fighters without protection for the most dangerous part of their mission. Some of them won't come home. Maguire watches the bombers grow smaller as he begins his turn back toward base. This is the third time this month he's had to leave bombers unescorted. The third time he's landed with just enough fuel to taxi to his revetment before the engines sputter and die. The problem isn't the P-38 itself. The Lockheed Lightning is one of the finest fighters America has produced, fast, heavily armed, and deadly in a dogfight. In Europe, P-38s are escorting bombers deep into Germany. But Europe is different. Europe has airfields every 100 miles. Europe doesn't have the vast, empty stretches of ocean that define the Pacific War. 3 months earlier, February 1944, 5th Air Force Headquarters, Port Moresby, New Guinea. Major General Ennis Whitehead stares at the map on his wall. Red pins mark Japanese positions. Blue pins mark Allied airfields. The distances between them are staggering. From Port Moresby to Rabaul, 650 miles. From Hollandia to the Philippines, over 1,400 miles. And Tokyo sits 1,500 miles from the nearest American-held base in the Marianas, which they haven't even captured yet. The intelligence reports on his desk tell a story of strategic frustration. Japanese air power is being slowly strangled, but not fast enough. American bombers are pounding enemy positions, but without fighter escort, losses are mounting. B-24s and B-25s are going out alone, facing Zeros and Oscars with only their own defensive guns for protection. The standard doctrine says a P-38 has an operational radius of about 400 miles. With drop tanks, their external fuel tanks slung under the wings, that extends to maybe 600 miles. Combat radius, accounting for takeoff, climb to altitude, potential dogfighting, and landing reserves, is even less. By the time a P-38 reaches some targets, it has perhaps 15 minutes of fighting time before it must turn for home. Whitehead's operations officer, Colonel Paul Wurtsmith, enters without knocking. "Sir, we just got the loss report from this morning's raid on Waywack." "How many?" 4 B-24s. 2 more damaged and barely made it back. Wurtsmith drops the report on the desk. Fighters had to turn back 90 miles short of target. Fuel. Always fuel. The equation that dominates every planning session, every mission brief, every pilot's consciousness from engine start to shutdown. Whitehead picks up another document, a memo from General George Kenney, 5th Air Force Commander. The subject line reads, Extended Range Operations Priority 1. Kenney wants fighters that can reach targets 800, 900, even 1,000 miles away. He wants fighters that can loiter over a target area, dogfight, and still have enough fuel to make it home. He wants what everyone in the Pacific wants: more range. The Navy's doing it, Wurtsmith says. Their Hellcats are hitting targets the Japanese thought were safe. The Navy's fighting a different war. Island to island. They leapfrog, establish forward bases, and move on. We need to hit targets before the infantry gets there. We need to reach the Philippines. We need to reach Formosa. Eventually, we need to reach Japan itself. Wurtsmith nods. Engineering says we can add more drop tanks. Maybe develop bigger ones. Won't matter if pilots are afraid to use them properly. Half the pilots I talk to jettison their tanks at the first sign of enemy aircraft, even when they're still half full. They think the extra weight and drag will get them killed in a dogfight. Can you blame them? Fighting with full externals is like dancing with an anchor tied to your waist. Whitehead stands, walks to the map. His finger traces potential routes: New Guinea to the Philippines, Saipan to Tokyo, the island-hopping path that will eventually lead to Japan's doorstep. Every route is too far. Every mission is calculated on the knife edge of fuel consumption. What we need, Whitehead says slowly, is someone who can figure out how to make these aircraft fly farther without redesigning them. Someone who understands engines and fuel consumption at an intimate level. Someone these hotshot fighter pilots will actually listen to. April 1944. Port Moresby. The P-38 pilot who will eventually benefit from extended range techniques doesn't know it yet, but his war is about to change dramatically. Second Lieutenant Richard Bong, America's top fighter ace with 28 confirmed kills, sits in the mess hall nursing a cup of coffee that tastes like it was brewed from engine oil and optimism. Another milk run tomorrow, his wingman says. Escort to Hollandia. Again. How far? Right at our limit. 600 miles out.
Bong note.
600 miles means they'll reach the target, circle for maybe 10 minutes if they're lucky, then race for home with fuel gauges tickling empty. It means no margin for error. No margin for extended dogfights. No margin for headwinds or navigational mistakes. The door to the mess hall opens and a group of pilots from the 475th Fighter Group enters, still wearing their flight gear. They've just returned from a bomber escort, and their faces tell the story before anyone asks. Lost sight of the bombers 40 minutes from target. One of them announces to the room. Fuel state was critical. Had to leave them. No one says anything. What is there to say? Every pilot in the room has been there, made that call, felt that gnawing frustration of turning back while the bombers you're supposed to protect continue into danger alone. This is the reality of air combat in the Pacific in early 1944. American forces are advancing, pushing the Japanese back island by island, but the distances involved make every operation a calculated risk. The bombers can reach distant targets, but they go unprotected. The fighters have the speed and firepower to dominate any dogfight, but they can't stay aloft long enough to make a difference. Engineers at Lockheed are working on solutions. Pilots are developing new tactics. Ground crews are experimenting with fuel mixtures and load configurations. But so far, nothing has fundamentally changed the equation. The P-38L, the latest model, carries 410 gallons of internal fuel in its wings and fuselage. Add two 165-gallon drop tanks and you have 740 gallons total. Sounds like a lot. But the twin Allison V1710 engines, spinning their turbo superchargers at high altitude, drink fuel at a prodigious rate, especially at the power settings pilots have been trained to use. Standard operating procedure calls for 2,400 RPM and high manifold pressure during cruise. It's what the manual recommends. It's what every P-38 pilot learned in training. The engines run smooth at these settings, deliver good performance, and mechanics back home in the States assured everyone that these power settings were optimal. But optimal for what? For engine life? For performance? For fuel efficiency? In the cramped, hot confines of a P-38 cockpit over the Pacific, where the nearest friendly territory might be 2 hours of flying time away, optimal takes on a different meaning. What every pilot knows but rarely discusses is the fear. Not the fear of combat most accept that as part of the job. The fear of running out of fuel over open ocean. The fear of watching both propellers windmill to a stop, the engine silent, while nothing but empty Pacific spreads out below for hundreds of miles. Ditching a P-38 in the ocean is possible in theory. In practice, the survival rate is grim. The twin booms tend to dig in, the aircraft flips, and the pilot often can't get clear before the lightning sinks. So they fly conservative missions. They stick to targets within range. They leave the deeper targets to the bombers and pray the losses are acceptable. And they wait for someone to figure out a solution. That someone is already on his way, though nobody knows it yet. The same month, April 1944. Somewhere over the Pacific, Charles Lindbergh banks his P-38 through a lazy turn, his eyes scanning the instrument panel with the intensity of a man who once flew solo across the Atlantic with nothing but dead reckoning and nerve. At 52 years old, he's twice the age of most fighter pilots in the Pacific, and officially, he's not even supposed to be here. He's a civilian technical representative for United Aircraft Corporation, testing fighters in non-combat conditions. The fact that he's flying combat patrols is something everyone politely ignores. But Lindbergh isn't here to dogfight. He's here to solve a problem. His fuel gauge reads differently than it should at this point in the flight. He's been airborne for 3 hours, well beyond what standard doctrine says a P-38 should be able to manage on this fuel load. Yet his engines are purring smoothly, his altitude is stable, and he's still got reserve fuel remaining. The key is in how he's flying. RPM at 1,600. Manifold pressure at 32 inches. Mixture leaned out to the edge of rough running, then enriched just slightly. Every control input deliberate, calculated to minimize drag and maximize efficiency. He's treating this fighter plane like a long-distance airliner, and it's working. Below him, the Pacific stretches out in every direction, a vast expanse of blue that has swallowed countless aircraft and airmen. But Lindbergh isn't worried about fuel. For the first time in the Pacific War, a P-38 pilot isn't counting every minute, isn't doing constant mental calculations of fuel remaining versus distance to base. He's proving something that no one else believed possible. The P-38 Lightning can fly much, much farther than anyone thought. All he needs to do now is convince the fighter pilots to trust him. May 12, 1944. Nadzab Airfield, New Guinea. The rumor spreads through the 475th Fighter Group like wildfire through dry grass. Charles Lindbergh, the Charles Lindbergh is coming to their base. Some pilots are excited. Most are skeptical. A few are openly hostile. Lucky Lindy's going to teach us how to fly, Captain Danny Roberts says, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He's standing outside the operations tent, watching ground crews fuel a row of P-38s. Man flew across the Atlantic 17 years ago and suddenly he's an expert on combat operations. Major Thomas Maguire, overhearing this, turns from the mission board. He's a civilian contractor now. Technical representative. Not a combat pilot. Exactly my point. What's he going to tell us that we don't already know? We've been flying these birds for 2 years. We've fought Zeros from the Solomons to the Philippines. And some desk pilot who probably hasn't fired his guns in anger is going to give us pointers. But Roberts doesn't know what Maguire knows, what only a handful of senior officers know. Lindbergh has been flying combat missions. Unauthorized, unreported, but real. He's been testing fighters in field conditions, which is military bureaucracy's way of pretending that combat isn't combat when it's inconvenient to admit it. More importantly, he's been getting results that shouldn't be possible. The report sitting on the operations officer's desk tells an incredible story. On a recent flight from Los Negros to Hollandia, a distance of 475 miles, Lindbergh had landed with over 260 gallons of fuel remaining. His wingmen, flying at standard power settings, had landed with barely 60 gallons. Same aircraft, same external tanks, same route, same weather. The only variable was technique. When Lindbergh's C-47 transport touches down on Nadzab's coral runway that afternoon, a small crowd of pilots gathers to watch. They expect an old man, a relic from aviation's pioneering days. What emerges from the aircraft is something different: tall, lean, moving with the easy confidence of someone who spent more time in cockpits than most of them have been alive. He's wearing khaki trousers and a simple shirt, no uniform, no rank insignia. At 52, his face is weathered but his eyes are sharp, constantly observing, calculating. He looks at the P-38s lined up on the ramp the way a craftsman looks at tools with professional assessment rather than romantic attachment. Major Maguire meets him at the aircraft. "Mr. Lindbergh, welcome to Nadzab." General Whitehead sends his compliments and asks if you're ready for tomorrow's demonstration flight. "Ready now, if you have aircraft available." Lindbergh's voice is quiet, precise. "How many pilots will be participating?" 4 flights. 16 aircraft total. Mixed experience levels, some combat veterans with over 100 missions, some relatively new to theater. "Good. I want the veterans there especially. They're the ones who'll need the most convincing." The next morning, May 13th, 1944. 5:30 hours. The briefing room is packed. Pilots from 3 different fighter groups fill every seat, lean against walls, crowd the doorway. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and skepticism. These are men who fought the air war over the Pacific for months or years. They've learned their trade in the crucible of combat, figured out what works through trial and error, and buried friends who made mistakes. Now a civilian is going to tell them they've been doing it wrong. Lindbergh stands at the front of the room next to a large diagram of P-38's engine systems. He doesn't waste time with pleasantries. "Gentlemen, I've been asked to demonstrate fuel conservation techniques that will extend your combat radius by 30 to 50%. Some of you will think what I'm proposing is dangerous or impossible. It's neither. What it requires is discipline and a willingness to relearn how you think about your engines." He taps the diagram. The Allison V1710 is a superb engine. But you're operating it at power settings that prioritize longevity over efficiency. That made sense in training stateside where fuel was abundant and engine wear was a concern. Out here, with targets 800 miles away and no way to reach them, we need to rethink our priorities. Captain Roberts shifts in his seat, exchanges a glance with his wingman. Here it comes, the lecture from the man who's never had a zero on his tail. "Your manuals recommend 2,400 RPM and full throttle for cruise. I'm proposing 1,600 RPM and 32 inches of manifold pressure. This will cut your fuel consumption by nearly 40% while maintaining adequate cruise speed." A hand shoots up immediately. It's Lieutenant Colonel Gerald Johnson, veteran ace with 16 kills. "Mr. Lindbergh, with respect, that's below the recommended power band. At those settings, we'll lose climb performance, we'll lose speed, and if we're jumped by enemy fighters, we'll be at a critical disadvantage." "Will you?" Lindbergh's response is mild. "Let's examine that. At 1,600 RPM, you're still developing enough power to cruise at 210 miles per hour at altitude. Your current cruise speed at high power settings is what, 240? That's a 30 mile per hour difference. How often do you need that extra speed in cruise? When there's enemy aircraft around, every mile per hour matters." "Agreed. Which is why you maintain high power settings in combat zones. But on the transit to and from target? Over friendly territory? During the long overwater legs where no enemy aircraft operate? That's where you conserve fuel. You're not flying at combat power for 4 hours straight now, are you?" Johnson pauses. He isn't. No one is. The engines would overheat. The fuel would be gone in 90 minutes. "Here's what I'm proposing," Lindbergh continues. "Divide your flight into phases. Take off and initial climb high power, by the book. Transit to combat zone reduced power, maximum efficiency. Combat zone whatever power the tactical situation requires. Return flight reduced power again. This isn't radical. It's basic energy management." A captain from the 8th Fighter Group speaks up. "What about mixture control? Manual says to run auto-rich in cruise." Manual was written by engineers in Ohio who've never flown over 1,500 miles of ocean. Auto-rich keeps the engine safe but wastes fuel. I'm advocating leaning the mixture until the engines just begin to run rough, then enriching slightly. It's a technique that requires attention and feel, but the fuel savings are substantial. The room erupts in a dozen conversations at once. Some pilots are intrigued. Others are shaking their heads. A few look like they're ready to walk out. Maguire stands. "Gentlemen, settle down. Mr. Lindbergh is going to demonstrate these techniques in flight this morning. 4 flights will accompany him, 1 veteran flight, 3 newer pilots. We'll fly a standard combat patrol route, 550 miles out and back. At the end, we'll measure fuel consumption and compare results. Then you can judge for yourselves. 7:15 hours. 16 P-38 Lightnings line the runway. Lindbergh performs his pre-flight with methodical thoroughness, checking every control surface, every fuel connection, every instrument. The crew chief watching him work nods approvingly. This is a man who understands that attention to detail keeps you alive. In the cockpit, Lindbergh runs through the start sequence. The left engine catches first, its Allison V1710 rumbling to life with a cloud of blue smoke. Then the right. He lets them warm up properly, watching oil pressure and temperature gauges climb into normal ranges. Too many pilots are in a hurry, rush the warm-up, and cook their engines before they even leave the ground. Over the radio, Satan's Angels flight, check in. The responses come in sequence. Maguire is leading the veteran flight. His 3 wingmen are all aces, men with dozens of kills between them. They've agreed to fly Lindbergh's profile, but they're not happy about it. Lindbergh flight, check in. 3 younger pilots respond. They're less set in their ways, more willing to try something new. Lindbergh will be flying with them, demonstrating in real time. The takeoff is standard. Full power, tail up at 60 miles per hour, rotation at 90. The P-38 leaps off the coral runway, both engines screaming at maximum power. This is where the Allison V1710s are in their element, developing over 1,400 horsepower each, pulling the fighter into the tropical sky like it's racing heaven itself. At 1,000 feet, the reduction begins. Lindbergh flight, initiating cruise configuration. Reduce RPM to 1,600. Manifold pressure to 32 inches. Lean mixture to rough running, then enrich 2 positions. In his cockpit, Lindbergh demonstrates. He pulls the RPM levers back smoothly, watching the tachometers wind down. The engine note changes, dropping from a roar to a deeper, more economical rumble. The manifold pressure comes back. Then the mixture levers forward until the engines start to stumble, then back slightly. The P-38 is still climbing, still accelerating, but something feels wrong to the pilots following him. The engines sound too quiet. The power delivery feels anemic. Every instinct trained into them screams that they're operating outside the envelope, that they're setting themselves up for engine failure or enemy attack. Behind and above, Maguire's flight maintains standard power settings. They're climbing faster, pulling ahead. Maguire keys his radio. Lindbergh flight, you're falling behind. Enemy aircraft wouldn't wait for you to catch up. Understood. Satan's Angels lead. We're not in the combat zone yet. We're 200 miles from any Japanese position. Do you normally fly at combat power over friendly territory? A pause. Negative. Then match my power settings. We'll demonstrate the difference. Maguire hesitates, then complies. One by one, his flight reduces power. The P-38s settle into an easy cruise, their engines burbling contentedly at low RPM, their fuel gauges dropping much more slowly than usual. They fly northeast, following the coast of New Guinea, then turning over open ocean toward a simulated target area. The formation is loose, comfortable. The younger pilots in Lindbergh's flight are gaining confidence. The engines aren't overheating. The aircraft are responding normally. And their fuel gauges show something remarkable. They've been airborne for over an hour and still have nearly 80% of their fuel remaining. At 2 hours, Lindbergh calls for a fuel check. Lindbergh 2, showing 480 gallons remaining. Lindbergh 3, 495 gallons. Lindbergh 4, 500 gallons. Then Maguire's flight, Satan's Angels 2, 475 gallons. Nearly identical. Same flight profile, same techniques, same results. The skeptical veterans are getting the same fuel economy as Lindbergh. Satan's Angels lead. What's your fuel state? Lindbergh asks. Maguire checks his gauges again, does the mental math twice because he doesn't quite believe it. 505 gallons remaining. This is unprecedented. At standard power settings, we'd be down to 350 gallons by now. Correct. Which means instead of turning back soon, we have fuel for another 2 hours of flight. Or we can simulate combat power for an extended period and still make it home safely. Lindbergh advances his throttles, increases RPM to 2,400. His P-38 surges forward, engines howling. He climbs rapidly, racks the fighter through a series of high G turns, then pulls back into formation. His fuel gauges have dropped but not critically. His demonstrated combat maneuvering, and he still has plenty of reserve. Gentlemen, this is what extended range operations look like. You conserve fuel when you don't need speed. You use full power when the tactical situation demands it. And you always maintain enough reserve to get home. The flight continues for another 90 minutes. They practice various scenario-simulated interception, bomber escort, combat air patrol. Each time, they transition smoothly between cruise power and combat power. Each time, the fuel calculations work out favorably. When they finally turn for home, every pilot in the formation is beginning to believe. 11:45 hours. Nadzab Airfield. The 16 P-38s land in sequence, touching down on the coral runway and taxiing to their revetments. Ground crews swarm each aircraft with fuel trucks, measuring how much fuel remains in the tanks. The numbers, recorded on clipboards and transmitted to operations, tell an astonishing story. Lindbergh's flight, average 175 gallons remaining. Maguire's flight, average 165 gallons remaining. If they had flown at standard power settings for the same duration, they would have landed with less than 40 gallons, barely enough to taxi to parking. In the operations tent, General Whitehead reviews the numbers with his staff. That's over 130 gallons difference. On a typical escort mission, that translates to approximately 300 additional miles of range, his operations officer finishes. Maybe more if we optimize further. General, if these techniques are applied fleet-wide, we can reach targets we've written off as impossible. We can escort bombers to the Philippines. We can hit Japanese bases that think they're safe. Whitehead looks at the map on his wall, at all those red pins marking enemy positions just beyond current fighter range. His finger traces a line from New Guinea to the Philippines, then to Formosa, then to Japan itself. Get Lindbergh training every fighter group in theater. I want every P-38 pilot flying these profiles within 2 weeks. And get me projected range figures for operations against Tokyo. It's time we started thinking bigger. Outside, the pilots are gathering around Lindbergh's aircraft. The skepticism from this morning has transformed into eager questions. How do you know when you've leaned the mixture enough? What's the best RPM for different altitudes? Can you maintain these power settings in bad weather? Lindbergh answers each question patiently, demonstrating with engine controls, explaining the theory, correcting misconceptions. These are men who've been flying combat for months, and they're suddenly students again, relearning fundamentals. Captain Roberts, the skeptic from yesterday, approaches. Mr. Lindbergh, I owe you an apology. I didn't think a civilian could teach us anything we didn't already know. I was wrong. You were doing what you were trained to do, Captain. No apology necessary. But now I need you to help train others. These techniques only work if everyone uses them. One pilot flying efficiently doesn't change the strategic picture. Every pilot flying efficiently changes the war. Maguire joins them. How long have you known these techniques would work? Since 1927, Lindbergh replies. The Spirit of St. Louis used similar power management principles. The key was proving they applied to military aircraft in combat conditions. Now that we have, the question is how far we can push it. How far do you think we can go? Lindbergh looks east, toward targets that have remained beyond American reach. With these techniques and proper external tanks, I think we can reach Tokyo. I think we can put American fighters over the Japanese home islands before they know what's hit them. The silence that follows is heavy with implication. Tokyo. The ultimate target. The city that launched the war, now potentially within reach of American fighters. Maguire grins. Then let's go teach everyone else. Because I want to be one of the pilots who makes that flight. May 20th, 1944. Hollandia, New Guinea. Lieutenant Richard Bong watches Lindbergh's hands on the throttle quadrant, memorizing every movement. They're sitting in a P-38 cockpit on the flight line, engine silent, but the lesson is as intense as any combat briefing Bong has ever received. The mistake most pilots make is thinking of these controls as binary full power or idle. But there are 1,000 positions between those extremes, and each one has different fuel consumption characteristics. Lindbergh demonstrates, moving the RPM lever incrementally. At 1,600 RPM, you're in the sweet spot for cruise efficiency. At 1,800, you gain some speed but fuel consumption increases disproportionately. At 2,000, you're burning 30% more fuel for only 10% more speed. Bong, America's leading ace with 32 confirmed kills, nods thoughtfully. His Fort Zeros from Rabaul to Hollandia mastered every combat maneuver in the book, but this is different. This is mathematics and physics applied to air warfare in ways his training never covered. What about in combat? When you're in a turning fight with a zero, then you use every bit of power the engines will give you. These techniques aren't about being timid in combat, they're about having fuel reserves to get to combat and back home again. Every gallon you save in cruise is another minute you can fight at full power. Outside the cockpit, a line of P-38 pilots waits their turn. Word has spread through the 5th Air Force like a tactical revolution. Lindbergh has been conducting training sessions at every fighter base in theater, spending hours in cockpits with pilots, flying demonstration missions, proving his techniques work regardless of experience level or aircraft condition. The results are staggering. Fighter groups that could barely escort bombers 400 miles are now planning missions to targets 700 miles away. Squadrons that lost aircraft to fuel exhaustion on every major operation haven't had a fuel-related casualty in 2 weeks. The strategic map of the Pacific is being redrawn in real time, red pins marking Japanese positions suddenly moving into the reachable column. But it's not just about distance. It's about combat effectiveness. Major Gerald Johnson discovered this 3 days ago during an escort mission to Biak. His flight had used Lindbergh's cruise techniques for the 2-hour transit to target. When Japanese fighters appeared 9 Oscars diving from 28,000 feet, Johnson's flight still had enough fuel to engage at full combat power for 18 minutes. 18 minutes of high G turning, climbing, diving, and firing. Under the old power management, they would have had perhaps 8 minutes before fuel concerns forced them to disengage. Johnson had shot down 2 Oscars. His wingmen got 3 more. All 4 P-38s returned to base with comfortable fuel reserves. The word spreads, Lindbergh's techniques don't make you cautious. They make you lethal. June 3, 1944. 5th Air Force Headquarters. General George Kenney stands at his map table, studying reconnaissance photos of Japanese airfields in the Philippines. Beside him, General Whitehead and Colonel Paul Wurtsmith review fuel consumption data from the past 3 weeks. Every fighter group is reporting 30 to 45% fuel savings, Wurtsmith says. Some individual pilots are achieving 50%. Mechanical issues haven't increased, if anything, they've decreased. The engines are running cooler at reduced RPM. Kenney picks up a ruler, measures distances on the map. From Hollandia to Mindanao, 950 miles. From Morotai to Luzon, 830 miles. From any prospective base in the Marianas to Tokyo, 1,500 miles. With the old power settings, these missions were fantasy. Now they're possible, Whitehead confirms. We'd still be operating at extreme range, but possible. The P-38 with full external tanks, 2 310-gallon drop tanks, gives us over 1,000 gallons total fuel capacity. At Lindbergh's crew settings, that translates to roughly 8 hours of flight time, maybe 9 if conditions are favorable. Kenney does the mental arithmetic. 8 hours at 210 miles per hour cruise speed equals 1,680 miles. Enough to reach Tokyo from Iwo Jima or Saipan once those islands are captured. Enough to escort B-29 Superfortresses all the way to Japan and back. What does Lindbergh say? He thinks we can do it. He's requested permission to fly escort on the first Tokyo mission when the time comes. Says he wants to prove the concept at maximum operational range. He's a civilian consultant. I can't officially authorize him for combat operations over Japan. Whitehead and Wurtsmith exchange glances. Everyone in the room knows Lindbergh has been flying combat missions for weeks. The fiction that is merely a technical observer is wearing thin, but it's a convenient fiction that keeps the politicians happy. Unofficially. Kenny continues, if he happens to be testing long-range fuel consumption profiles in the same airspace where we're conducting combat operations, well, these things happen in war. A knock at the door interrupts them. A captain enters with a folder marked Urgent, Intelligence. Sirs, photo reconnaissance just returned from a sweep over the Marianas. The invasion fleet is assembling. Looks like we're going after Saipan and Tinian within the month. Once we take those islands, we'll have bases within B-29 range of Tokyo. Kenny takes the folder, studies the aerial photographs. Saipan, Tinian, Guam. Islands that will become unsinkable aircraft carriers, platforms from which America can strike at the Japanese home islands with impunity. When we take those islands, Kenny says slowly, I want P-38s ready to escort the first B-29 raid on Tokyo. I want American fighters over the Imperial Palace, showing the Japanese that nowhere is safe, nothing is beyond our reach. Can we do it? Whitehead nods. With Lindbergh's techniques? Yes, sir. We can do it. June 15, 1944. Over the Philippine Sea. The invasion of Saipan has begun. While Marines fight for every yard of beach, P-38s from the 475th Fighter Group fly top cover, their external tanks giving them the endurance to loiter over the invasion force for hours at a time. Captain Thomas Maguire leads his flight in a wide circle at 25,000 feet. They've been airborne for 3 hours and 40 minutes. Under the old power management doctrines, they would be approaching bingo fuel, the point where you must turn for home or risk running dry. Instead, Maguire's fuel gauges show over 300 gallons remaining. Enough for another 90 minutes of patrol, plus combat reserves. Satan's Angels lead. This is Warhawk control. We're picking up bogies inbound from the northwest. Distance 50 miles, altitude 18,000, estimated 12 to 15 aircraft. Roger. Warhawk. Satan's Angels engaging. Maguire's flight turns toward the threat, advancing throttles to combat power. The engines respond instantly, RPMs climbing, manifold pressure building, the P-38s accelerating from cruise speed to fighting speed in seconds. This is the beauty of Lindbergh's system. You conserve fuel when you don't need speed, but full power is always available when you do. The Japanese fighters appear as dark specks against cloud zeros, probably from Iwo Jima, trying to interfere with the invasion. They're expecting American fighters to be low on fuel this far from base, expecting the P-38s to be cautious, defensive. They're wrong. Maguire takes his flight into a high-side attack, diving from superior altitude with all the energy advantages. The Zeros scatter, trying to turn into the attack, but P-38s at full power are devastatingly fast in the dive. Maguire's first burst catches a Zero amidships, 20mm cannon shells tearing through the lightweight fighter's fuselage. It breaks apart at 15,000 feet. The dogfight swirls across 20 miles of sky. Maguire's flight has the fuel to press every advantage, to chase fleeing enemies, to maintain combat power throughout the engagement. Normally, this deep into a mission, P-38 pilots would be watching their fuel gauges as much as their gun sights. Not today. When the fight ends 7 Zeros destroyed, the rest fleeing Maguire's flight still has enough fuel to patrol for another hour before returning to base. They land with reserves that would have seemed impossible 2 months ago. In the debriefing, Maguire tells the intelligence officer, Lindbergh's techniques just changed everything. We're not fighting with one hand tied behind our backs anymore. We can go anywhere, fight as long as necessary, and still come home safe. July 8, 1944. Eiley Field, Saipan. The first P-38s land on Saipan's captured airfield less than 3 weeks after the invasion. The runway is barely finished. CBs are still smoothing coral and laying mast and matting, but it's operational. And it's 1,500 miles from Tokyo. Lindbergh steps off a transport aircraft and surveys the island. To the north, Mount Tapachor dominates the skyline. To the west, the Pacific stretches toward the horizon. And somewhere beyond that horizon, invisible but calculable, lies Japan. Colonel Charles MacDonald, commanding officer of the 475th Fighter Group, meets him at the aircraft. "Mr. Lindbergh, welcome to Saipan. We're setting up operations for long-range escort missions. The first B-29 raid on Tokyo is scheduled for late November. General Kenny wants P-38s along for the ride." They walk toward the operations tent, passing rows of P-38s being assembled and serviced. Mechanics are installing the new 310-gallon drop tanks, larger than the previous models, designed specifically for extreme-range missions. "November gives us 4 months to prepare," Lindbergh observes. "That's sufficient. We'll need to train pilots specifically for overwater navigation at extended range. We'll need to establish fuel consumption profiles for different altitudes and weather conditions. And we'll need to solve the cold weather operations problem." Cold weather? We're in the tropics. At 30,000 feet over Japan, temperatures can drop to minus 40 degrees. Engines will be operating at the edge of their thermal envelope. Fuel consumption changes in extreme cold. Oil viscosity changes. These variables need to be tested and accounted for. MacDonald makes notes. This level of planning is unprecedented in the Pacific theater. Most fighter operations are measured in hours of preparation time. This mission will require months. Over the next weeks, a systematic training program takes shape. Pilots fly navigational training missions, learning to dead reckon over open ocean for hours at a time. They practice formation flying at reduced power settings, maintaining position while conserving fuel. They study weather patterns between Saipan and Tokyo, learning to recognize the jet stream a high-altitude wind current that can either help or hinder them dramatically. Lindbergh flies nearly every day, sometimes with experienced pilots, often with newer arrivals who need to learn the techniques from scratch. He's patient, methodical, insistent on precision. A 2-degree error in navigation over 1,500 miles can put you 50 miles off course. A 5% miscalculation in fuel consumption can leave you swimming in the Pacific. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Bong, now America's top ace with 40 kills, flies with Lindbergh on a long-range training mission that pushes the P-38's envelope to the limit. They take off at dawn, 2 P-38s climbing into a sky streaked with orange and gold. The fuel load is maximum internal tanks topped off, 2 310-gallon drop tanks slung under the wings. Total fuel capacity, 1,030 gallons. It's more weight than some pilots are comfortable carrying, but Lindbergh has proven repeatedly that the P-38 can handle it. They fly north, toward empty ocean, climbing to 28,000 feet. At altitude, Lindbergh establishes cruise configuration, 1,600 RPM, 32 inches manifold pressure, mixture leaned carefully. The engines settle into their economical burble, propellers turning just fast enough to maintain altitude and airspeed. For 6 hours they fly, barely speaking, monitoring instruments, making minor adjustments. The Pacific below is an endless expanse of blue, occasionally broken by cloud formations or the distant sight of an island. At this altitude, the curvature of the Earth is visible, a reminder of just how far they are from anything that matters. At 3 hours out, they turn back. By the time Saipan appears on the horizon, they've been airborne for 6.5 hours. When they land, the fuel measurement is precise, 185 gallons remaining in Lindbergh's aircraft, 170 in Bong's. They've just flown 1,400 miles farther than the distance from Saipan to Tokyo and back. And they've done it with comfortable fuel reserves. "It's possible," Bong says after they shut down. "Tokyo is actually possible." "It was always possible," Lindbergh replies. "The aircraft were always capable. We just needed to learn how to use them properly." October 18, 1944. Eiley Field, Saipan. The briefing room is crowded with the best fighter pilots in the Pacific theater. Richard Bong sits in the front row. Thomas Maguire is 2 rows back. Charles MacDonald stands at the front with a large map of the Pacific. And Charles Lindbergh, officially still just a civilian technical representative, sits off to one side. "Gentlemen," MacDonald begins, "on November 24th, we're going to Tokyo." The room erupts. For 3 years, American forces have been fighting their way across the Pacific, island by island, getting closer to Japan but never close enough for fighters to reach the home islands. Now, finally, the mathematics work. MacDonald traces the route on the map. Saipan to Tokyo, 1,480 miles. We'll escort the first B-29 raid on Japanese aircraft manufacturing plants. 36 P-38s from the 475th and 431st Fighter Groups. We'll fly at 25,000 to 30,000 feet, using cruise techniques developed by Mr. Lindbergh. Estimated flight time, 7 hours, 15 minutes total. 7 hours. The longest fighter escort mission ever attempted. We'll carry full internal fuel plus 2 310-gallon drop tanks. Total fuel capacity, 1,030 gallons. At cruise power settings, and I emphasize, these power settings are mandatory, not optional. We'll have enough fuel to reach Tokyo, patrol over the target for up to 30 minutes, and return with reserves. A captain raises his hand. What's the abort point? How far out before we're committed? There is no abort point. Once we launch, we're going to Tokyo. Fuel calculations are based on perfect execution of the flight plan. Any deviation combat with enemy fighters, weather diversions, navigation errors comes out of your reserve. There's no margin for major mistakes. The gravity of this settles over the room. This isn't a routine escort mission. This is an all-or-nothing bet that Lindbergh's techniques will work at extreme range under combat conditions. Weather forecasting shows favorable winds. We'll have a tailwind on the way up, headwind on the way back. Navigation will be critical. We're flying 750 miles over open ocean before we reach Japan. If you get separated from the formation, you navigate by dead reckoning and hope you calculated correctly. Lindbergh stands. All eyes turn to him. Gentlemen, I'll be flying with you on this mission. Not as a commander. Colonel MacDonald has that responsibility, but as a technical observer. I've helped develop these techniques, and I want to prove they work at maximum operational range. Someone in the back mutters, technical observer. Right. Lindbergh smiles slightly. I know what you're thinking. Yes, I'm 52 years old. Yes, I'm technically a civilian. But I've flown combat with many of you. I've tested these techniques under fire. And I want to be there when we show Japan that American fighters can reach their home islands. He pauses, his voice growing more serious. What you're about to do has never been done before. No fighter aircraft has ever flown 1,500 miles to conduct combat operations and return safely. The Germans couldn't do it. The British couldn't do it. The Japanese certainly couldn't do it. But you can. Because you've learned to fly your aircraft efficiently, to manage your fuel like the precious resource it is, to plan and execute with precision. This mission will change the war. When American fighters appear over Tokyo, the psychological impact will be enormous. The Japanese have convinced their population that the home islands are inviolable, that no enemy can reach them. We're going to prove them wrong. The briefing continues for another hour. Navigation waypoints, radio procedures, emergency protocols, recognition signals. Every detail is planned, rehearsed, calculated. Nothing is left to chance, because at 1,500 miles from base, chance can kill you. As the pilots file out, Bong approaches Lindbergh. Sir, thank you for everything you've taught us. We wouldn't be able to do this without your techniques. You would have figured it out eventually. I just accelerated the process. Lindbergh extends his hand. Fly safe, Lieutenant. And when you get to Tokyo, make it count. November 24th, 1944. 5:45 hours. Eiley Field, Saipan. The pre-dawn darkness is alive with the sound of engines. 36 P-38 Lightnings sit on the hardstand, their twin Allisons already warming up, exhausts glowing orange in the tropical night. Ground crews make final checks on external tanks, armorists verify ammunition loads, and crew chiefs give thumbs-up signals to nervous pilots. Charles Lindbergh settles into his cockpit, running through the familiar routine with methodical precision. Fuel selectors checked. Mixture controls set. Trim tabs adjusted. His hands move across the instrument panel like a pianist touching familiar keys, each movement deliberate and purposeful. At 52, he's about to fly the longest fighter mission in history. In the cockpit 2 aircraft over, Richard Bong completes his own pre-flight. 40 kills. America's ace of aces. He's fought from the Solomons to the Philippines, mastered every aspect of aerial combat, but this mission is different. This isn't about dogfighting or tactical maneuvering. This is about endurance, navigation, and fuel management over 1,500 miles of open ocean. Thomas Maguire taxis his P-38 into position, leading the second flight. His hands rest lightly on the controls, but his mind is racing through calculations. 7 hours airborne. 1,030 gallons of fuel. 1,480 miles to Tokyo. Every variable accounted for, every contingency planned. But plans rarely survive contact with reality, and they're about to fly farther from friendly territory than any fighter pilot in history. Hade's flight. This is Eiley Tower. You are cleared for takeoff. Wind 080 at 12 knots. Altimeter 29902. Good hunting. Colonel Charles MacDonald advances his throttles, feeling the twin Allisons surge to full power. The P-38 accelerates down the runway, tail rising, the heavy external tanks adding mass but not preventing the inevitable moment when the fighter lifts off and climbs into the darkness. Behind him, 35 more P-38s follow at precise intervals. At 1,000 feet, the formation begins to assemble. Flights join up using running lights, each pilot finding his position through practiced choreography. When the last fighter slots into formation, MacDonald checks his watch, 6:03 hours. The sun is just beginning to paint the eastern horizon with pale light. All flights, this is Hade's lead. Set cruise configuration. RPM 1600. Manifold pressure 32 inches. Lean mixture to rough running, then enrich 2 positions. Acknowledge. One by one, the flight leaders confirm. Across the formation, pilots pull back their RPM levers, reduce manifold pressure, lean their mixtures. The sound of the formation changes their aggressive roar of combat power, dropping to an economical rumble. To pilots trained on standard procedures, it still feels wrong, like they're operating on the edge of engine failure. But the fuel gauges tell a different story. At these power settings, the fuel flow drops from 100 gallons per hour to 65. They climb to 25,000 feet, leveling off as the sun breaks fully over the horizon. Below them, the Pacific stretches away in all directions, empty, vast, unforgiving. Saipan is already disappearing behind them. Ahead, nothing but water for the next 750 miles. Lindbergh monitors his instruments with clinical precision. Oil pressure steady at 75 psi. Cylinder head temperatures holding at 220 degrees. Fuel flow from the external tanks balanced and feeding properly. The P-38 is flying beautifully, the engines purring contentedly at reduced power, the airframe stable in the thin air. His mind drifts to another flight, 17 years ago, when he had crossed an ocean alone in a tiny single-engine monoplane. That flight had been 3,600 miles, New York to Paris, and he'd nursed the spirit of St. Louis across the Atlantic with the same kind of obsessive fuel management he's teaching these pilots now. The principles haven't changed, only the aircraft and the stakes. At 1 hour out, MacDonald calls for a fuel check. Hade's 2, showing 860 gallons remaining. Hade's 3, 875 gallons. Hade's 4, 880 gallons. The reports continue. Everyone is within acceptable parameters. At standard cruise power, they would already be down to 650 gallons. The difference, 225 gallons, represents over an hour of additional flight time. Over 200 miles of extra range. Bong flies his aircraft by feel, making tiny adjustments to maintain perfect formation position while using minimum control inputs. Every unnecessary maneuver wastes fuel. Every moment of inefficient flying cuts into reserves. At this range, sloppiness can kill you as surely as enemy bullets. 8-15 hours. 400 miles north of Saipan. The formation continues north-northwest, climbing slowly to 28,000 feet as they burn fuel and the aircraft become lighter. The oxygen masks are uncomfortable, the cold at altitude biting despite heated flight suits, but no one complains. They're fighter pilots flying the mission of their lives. Lindbergh scans the horizon constantly. Somewhere out here, Japanese patrol aircraft might be operating. Long-range reconnaissance planes or flying boats that could radio their position, bringing fighters up to intercept. But the Pacific remains empty. They're beyond the range of Japanese land-based aircraft, flying through a no-man's land where neither side normally operates. At 2 hours, another fuel check. Still on profile. The external tanks are feeding properly, the engines consuming fuel at predicted rates. Navigation is perfect. McDonald's lead navigator has them within 2 miles of their planned track. But weather is building ahead. A line of cumulus towers rises from 15,000 to 35,000 feet, blocking their path. McDonald evaluates the situation. They can climb over, but that means higher fuel consumption. They can go around, but that adds distance and time. Or they can go through, accepting turbulence and the risk of separated aircraft. Hade's flight. We're going through.
Titan formation.
Watch for turbulence and icing. They enter the clouds at 28,000 feet. Immediately, turbulence batters the formation. The P-38s bounce and shake, buffeted by updrafts and downdrafts. Ice begins forming on the wings, adding weight and reducing lift. Pilots fight to maintain formation, their aircraft pitching and rolling in the rough air. Lindbergh watches his airspeed indicator carefully. The added drag of ice formation increases fuel consumption. He enriches his mixture slightly, adds 50 RPM to maintain altitude. These small adjustments, multiplied across 30 minutes of cloud flying, will cost him perhaps 15 gallons of fuel. Acceptable. The margin is tight, but they planned for contingencies. They break out of the clouds at 9:25 hours, the formation intact but scattered. McDonald calls everyone back into position. One pilot reports rough running on his right engine, possible icing in the carburetor. He's instructed to apply carburetor heat and monitor closely. If the engine fails, he'll abort and try to make it back to Saipan. Alone. Over 600 miles of open ocean. The engine smooths out after 5 minutes. Crisis averted. But the incident reminds everyone how far they are from help. 10:45 hours. 200 miles south of Japan. Hade's lead. This is Hade's 6. I have landfall visual. Dead ahead, approximately 40 miles. Japan. The home islands. Every pilot in the formation sees it now, a dark line on the horizon, mountains rising from the sea. They're the first American fighters to reach this far north, the first to approach the Japanese homeland with offensive intent. All flights, advance to combat power. RPM 2400. Full manifold pressure. Prepare to jettison external tanks on my command. The formation comes alive. Engines that have been burbling contentedly for 4.5 hours suddenly roar to full power. The P-38s accelerate, climbing to 30,000 feet. Pilots flip switches, arming their guns 4.50 caliber machine guns and 120mm cannon in each aircraft. They've carried these weapons 1,300 miles. Now they'll use them. Lindbergh's fuel gauges show 385 gallons remaining. Enough for an hour at combat power, plus reserves for the return flight. The external tanks are nearly empty. He'll jettison them before entering the combat zone. The mathematics have worked perfectly. They're here, over Japan, with fuel to fight. The coast of Honshu materializes below villages, rice paddies, roads, all the infrastructure of an empire at war. From 30,000 feet, it looks peaceful, almost serene. But intelligence reports say this area bristles with anti-aircraft guns and fighter bases. The Japanese know American B-29s have been ranging over their cities. But they don't know American fighters can reach this far. Until now. Hade's flight. Tally-ho. Bogies, 11 o'clock high, Angels 32. Count 12 plus. Japanese fighters, probably Tojos or Franks from the local air defense units, climbing to intercept. They've been scrambled to deal with the B-29s now approaching Tokyo. They don't expect to find American fighters at their altitude. Drop tanks, now. All flights engage. Lindbergh hits the release, feels the twin 310-gallon tanks fall away. His P-38 suddenly becomes lighter, more responsive. He racks into a hard turn, following McDonald's flight into combat. The Japanese fighters are climbing aggressively, probably assuming the American bombers are unescorted. When they spot the P-38 formation, there's a moment of visible hesitation in their flight path as they try to understand what they're seeing. Maguire's flight strikes first, diving from superior altitude with devastating effect. His opening burst catches a Tojo before it can maneuver, 20mm shells tearing through the cockpit. The Japanese fighter rolls inverted and falls away, trailing smoke. The sky erupts into a swirling dogfight. P-38s and Japanese fighters merge at 30,000 feet over the approaches to Tokyo, contrails marking every turn and climb. Lindbergh finds himself tracking a Frank that's trying to dive away, a mistake, since the P-38 is faster in the dive than any Japanese fighter. He closes to 300 yards, lines up carefully, and fires a 3-second burst. Tracers arc across the sky. Most miss, but enough connect. The Frank shudders, pieces flying off its wing, then snaps into an uncontrolled spin. Lindbergh doesn't follow. He's not here to count kills. He pulls back into formation, scanning for threats. The dogfight lasts 12 minutes. When the surviving Japanese fighters break off and flee, the Americans have downed 8 confirmed with 3 probables. 2 P-38s are damaged but flyable. And most importantly, everyone still has fuel. Bong checks his gauges, 340 gallons remaining. He's used 45 gallons in the dogfight, exactly as predicted in briefings. The fuel management discipline holds even in combat. Hade's flight. Form up on me. The bombers are approaching Tokyo. Let's go do our job. 11:30 hours. Over Tokyo. The B-29 superfortresses appear as silver crosses against clouds, 30 massive bombers in tight formation. They're hitting aircraft manufacturing plants in the Tokyo suburbs, and their bomb bays are already open, preparing for the attack run. Below, Tokyo sprawls across the Kanto Plain, a vast urban landscape of neighborhoods, factories, government buildings, and at the center, the Imperial Palace. Millions of Japanese citizens going about their day, many of them looking up as the bombers appear overhead. Some have seen B-29s before, high-altitude raiders that come and go beyond the reach of conventional defenses. But they've never seen American fighters escorting them. The psychological impact is immediate and profound. Japanese pilots watching from their bases see American fighters over Tokyo and understand what it means. Nowhere is safe. Japanese civilians looking up see the twin-boom silhouettes of P-38s circling protectively around the bombers and realize their government's assurances about homeland invulnerability were lies. More Japanese fighters scramble, dozens of them, rising from bases around Tokyo in a desperate attempt to stop the raid. But the P-38s are there, at altitude, with fuel to fight. Every intercept attempt is met by American fighters with enough endurance to press the engagement. Lindbergh flies top cover while below him, Maguire's and Bong's flights engage Japanese defenders trying to reach the bombers. The air fills with tracers, the sharp crack of cannon fire, the sight of aircraft burning and falling. The B-29s drop their bombs through it all, hitting their targets with precision before turning for home. And through it all, the P-38 pilots monitor their fuel, manage their power settings, fight with disciplined aggression. They know they have 750 miles of ocean to cross on the way home. Every gallon matters. At 12:05 hours, the bombers complete their run and turn south. McDonald calls the formation together. Hade's flight. Mission complete. Form up for return flight. Set cruise configuration. The power comes back. RPMs drop to 1,600. Manifold pressure reduces to 32 inches. The fighters settle back into their economical cruise, escorting the bombers away from Japan toward the safety of open ocean. Lindbergh takes one last look at Tokyo disappearing behind them. They've done it. American fighters over the Japanese home islands, proving that Lindbergh's techniques work at maximum operational range under combat conditions. The strategic implications are staggering. 15 hours. 500 miles south of Japan. The formation drones south through the afternoon sky. Pilots are exhausted, 6.5 hours airborne, most of it at high altitude in freezing temperatures. The oxygen masks chafe, the flight suits are soaked with sweat despite the cold, and everyone's rear end is numb from sitting in uncomfortable seats for so long. But the fuel calculations hold. McDonald calls for regular fuel checks, and every time, the numbers come back acceptable. They're burning fuel at predicted rates. The headwind is slightly stronger than forecast, cutting their ground speed by 15 miles per hour, but they plan for that contingency. At 16:30 hours, Saipan appears on the horizon. After 7 hours and 12 minutes airborne, Ailey Field has never looked so beautiful. Ailey Tower, this is Hade's lead. 36 aircraft returning from Tokyo. All aircraft operational. Request straight-in approach. Hade's lead, Ailey Tower. Cleared straight-in runway 24. Welcome home. They land in sequence, one P-38 every 45 seconds, touching down on the coral runway and taxiing to their revetments. Ground crews swarm each aircraft, measuring remaining fuel, checking for damage, conducting post-flight inspections. When Lindbergh shuts down his engines, the sudden silence is overwhelming. He sits in the cockpit for a moment, letting the reality sink in. 7 hours, 12 minutes airborne. 1,480 miles to Tokyo and back. Combat operations over the Japanese home islands. And he's landed with 95 gallons of fuel remaining, enough for another half-hour flight if needed. The mission is a complete success. 17:30 hours. Operations tent. The debriefing is thorough but jubilant. Every pilot reports their fuel consumption, combat actions, observations. The intelligence officers record everything, building a picture of Japanese air defenses and tactical responses. The final numbers are remarkable. All 36 aircraft returned safely. 8 confirmed kills, 3 probables, 2 damaged. Average fuel remaining on landing, 87 gallons. Not a single aircraft experienced fuel-related emergency. Mission duration, 7 hours, 12 minutes. Distance covered, 2,960 miles total. General Kenny enters the tent, followed by General Whitehead. The assembled pilots snap to attention. Gentlemen, be seated. What you accomplished today will be studied in military academies for generations. You've extended the combat radius of fighter aircraft beyond anything previously thought possible. You've proven that American air power can reach anywhere, strike any target, and return home safely. He pauses, looking at Lindbergh. Mr. Lindbergh, on behalf of the United States Army Air Forces, I want to thank you for your contributions. Your fuel management techniques have revolutionized our operational capabilities in the Pacific. Without your knowledge and persistence, this mission would have been impossible. Lindbergh stands. General, I didn't do this alone. Every pilot here learned these techniques, trusted them, and executed them perfectly under combat conditions. They're the ones who proved it could be done. Nevertheless, you showed us the way. Kenny turns to address the entire room. Starting next week, we'll be conducting regular fighter escorts to Tokyo and other Japanese home island targets. The enemy needs to understand that we can strike anywhere, anytime. And it's all possible because you learned to fly your aircraft efficiently. The room erupts in cheers. Later, as the sun sets over Saipan, Lindbergh stands alone on the flight line, looking at the row of P-38s. Simple adjustments reduced RPM, lower manifold pressure, lean mixture control. Techniques he'd used crossing the Atlantic in 1927, now applied to modern fighters with devastating strategic effect.
Bong áp rocket.
Sir, I just wanted to say, what you taught us changed everything. We're not flying the same war anymore. You were always capable of this, Lieutenant. The aircraft were always capable. Sometimes all it takes is someone asking, what if we tried it differently? They stand in comfortable silence, watching the tropical sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Tomorrow, more P-38s will fly to Tokyo. And the day after that. And the day after that. The Japanese home islands are no longer beyond reach. The war has entered a new phase. And it all started with one pilot's simple discovery, that flying efficiently could give you an extra 600 miles of range and change the course of a war.